by giving this priority, by giving this sort of a taken for granted status to formal organization, we already assume that this is like, you know, a better way to creation of macro actors. And it may be, maybe not. You know, the people who are studying social movements can have, you know, varying opinions on that. Should you make a formal organization, or is it the end of the movement as it was? So that's what I mean, sort of to open, not to decide from the beginning that this is how it is, but to see that there is a certain phenomenon, there is something. It's supposed to be a tool. Well, take social movements. Will a formal organization be a good tool for achieving what the social movement is, or will it kill the movement? You know, this is an open question, and this is a question that can be studied. Whereas we very often jump over this sort of question, and we say that here is a formal organization, let's study it. I don't know whether...
How would you suggest studying the ongoing reproduction of hierarchies in settler state or in states with different social movements in their relationship between those?
Yes, well, this is a very good example, because this already the word hierarchy suggests a certain sort of static configuration. But if you see in it, sort of more in narratology sense, you see that they are sort of changing places. They might be changing places. They may not be changing places. This is also very interesting. But I do think that structures in general are an optical illusion. I mean, like if you watch the same running water for a long time, you will see a structure in it. Just because there's a stone in, or whatever it is happening, that causes it. So you imagine that you caught a structure, but of course, you know, the water can be running differently. So this is more like, you know, they are fairy tales metaphor, like tug of the war or what have you, you know, when the various parts are trying to win an upper place, you know, and but the point is exactly how it's changing or not changing, because what you're calling the reproduction, that's again, that I think is an illusion. If the movement is repetitive, we take it, I mean, we see it as a lack of movement. But it's not a lack of movement. It's the reproduction exactly of the same movement. So that's why it looks static.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in the small problem that you talked about at the beginning of the boundaries of organizations, because I would agree with you that boundaries are always making and unmaking, and that I find them a fascinating place. I'm wondering if you could elaborate any more on what you see as the problems of studying organizational boundaries and the processes of making and unmaking.
Well, I don't see any problems with studying the processes of making and unmaking, but I'm seeing problems with taking them for granted as existing. It's again, it's again reification, because then you don't remember the point. You don't remember that the boundaries didn't exist before, and you tend to forget that they could be running in a completely different place. I mean, I don't want to go into the political sciences, but this is, you know, extremely interesting. I mean, all these borders that we take for granted, and you know, it depends how far back you go, and you will be shocked to see that they didn't exist at all. They ran completely differently. That what we take for cultures and communities could be done completely differently, and sometimes it is almost, you know, a random historical event, you know, historical contingency. So that's why I think it's very interesting. And I think there are quite a few attempts to study this boundary work, as it's called now in a fashionable expression. But even my colleagues who just edited this book, which is called Managing Boundaries. So boundaries already exist, and they have to be managed. It's already assumed the sort of the existence, and then sort of asks what. And I think this is very, very typical for many organization studies. I mean, we take for granted that certain things are, and we ask themselves why they are like that. Big, small, innovative, non-innovative, whatever. But it's sort of to go back, and this is a lesson from ants, to go back to see, you know, how they became as you know, as they appear to us right now in this moment.
We have time for one last question.
Yeah.
Is it me? Yeah. I just wanted to, I understand your point about do not mix up actants and actors with sites. And, but I wanted to ask you, how do you, because we've kind of been, I guess, arguing with our colleagues that context matters. That, you know, the way that they study organizations and, you know, with the, you know, more positivist methods and things like that, they don't really take context into consideration. So how do we reconcile, you know, do not mix up actants and actors with sites and the idea that context matters?
On context, I go literal. Context means text that you are taking into consideration with the text you have in the focus. So whatever is the context, it depends what you choose to study together with it. So see, it's very different from the idea of environment as a sort of existing thing that is behind the boundaries. So if you look at something, and then there is a sort of methodological question, who decides what text should be taken up together? So it's, you know, I think about two drastically different approaches. If you remember, I mean, not remember, but if you've read Crouzier's famous study, you know, he decides the context, and he decides that he's studying about this, you know, the organization that he's studying in the context of French culture, mind you. I mean, it's rather ambitious. We who are less ambitious chose context because of the clues left by the, given to us by the, you know, actants we study. Because, you know, context can be everything. Culture of France, I think it's a rather big context. But, you know, it's, if you listen to people and to other objects, you can see what is the proper context, because this is what they relate to. So it's a sort of very literal. I've been told that this is a very poor treatment of the word context going on its literal meaning, but I think I find it helpful.
I have a question about the second postulate, and I guess I would argue that even in the beginning of stories, actants do have identities. They may change, they may be uncertain at the beginning, but that they're not generic.
Well, how about I prefer the word character, you know, because it's sort of closer to so yeah, even actors have names, and you know, we can quarrel about whether John is a generic name or whether it's a proper name. But my point is that even if somebody is called John, we don't know whether he is a villain or a hero. And if a computer is called Mac or IBM, I mean, that's a good example. Try not to have prejudices and assume that if a computer is an IBM is a bad computer, for example. So this kind of symmetry. You understand I'm using Mac, so I'm doing this symmetry thing often. So in that sense, because again, back to, if you know everything about how those actants and actors are, what they are doing, so why should you be studying them? I mean, it's
Well, we're fairly quick to give something a name and even an identity fairly early, even if it's wrong.
Yeah, but then you do, you know, then you sort of you are literally. I mean, I would agree with you very much. The very action of giving names is a kind of action program. So yes, I didn't mean in that sense. I mean, sort of, I made it in the sense of not decide on the character before you see the character act, as it were.
Well, I think it's time to thank Mr. Czarniawska very much.